Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We've got a really good session ahead, one that I'm really excited about, and I think that everyone's going to really enjoy. What we're going to be talking about today is how to retain top talent. With us today, I have Justin Maguire, the CEO of MCG Talent. Many of you may know him. He's been in the recruitment industry for quite a long time. So he knows a thing or two about what it takes to attract and retain talent. Hello, Justin. Thank you so much
Sarah.
for joining us.
Hi, Sarah. Hi. Thanks very much. Super excited to be here today. Really looking forward to deep diving into our conversation, and especially delighted to be here with Wayne, my buddy Wayne. So Wayne, tell us about yourself and what it is you do.
Well, bizarrely, I'm in sunny London. Look at that. You never expect to see the sun like this in London. Thank you very much, guys, for inviting me to be here as part of the session. Very excited to be here because we've got lots of data and insight we wanted to share with you as part of this. Super short story in terms of my journey. Spent the last 20 odd years working now with more than about 1,000 different CEOs in more than 30 countries around the world. And we've had about 50,000 managers go through our program. So if you imagine a sort of 1,000 CEOs on a spectrum, right, from deeply empathic to sort of super psychopath on that side of the scale, we've learned a lot of the entire spectrum about what great leaders and managers do. And of course, we've spent a lot of time trying to investigate what drives people to want to stay or indeed leave the organization. So I look forward to getting into that more as part of the session.
Thank you both very much. Really happy for you both to be with us today to talk about this. We're also joined by Laura, who is going to be our chat master today. So she's just going to run through a few housekeeping rules with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. So yes, just a couple of things to run through. A recording will be available after the session. So if you have to dip off for any reason or you can't stay for the full duration, that's absolutely fine. Or, if you wanted to share it with a colleague or friend, we will get that over to you via email. We're also going to be using the chat function during this session. So if you wiggle your mouse over the chat box at the bottom, make sure it's set to host and panelists, and we'll get all of your questions through or comments through via that chat box. It will be anonymous. It'll only come to us as long as it is set to host and panelists, like I said. Now, the purpose of this chat is for a live Q&A throughout the whole session. We will make sure we answer all of your questions, so pop them in, and we'll run at the end a Q&A session, which I'm sure you're all looking forward to. So the question that I'm going to ask you to start with is, what do you think are the most important factors for candidates when it comes to talent retention? This is just to get you used to using that chat function where you will ask your questions in future. Now, Sarah's going to run through an agenda with you, and while she's doing that, pop your comments into the chat function and we'll review afterwards.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Laura. Everyone, make sure to get as many questions as you can into the chat function. It's a really good opportunity to ask anything that you want to for Justin and for Wayne, and we'll get to all the questions at some point. We won't leave until we've answered them all. In terms of what we are going to be going through today, first we're going to look at the type of challenges that employers are facing when it comes to retention. Then we're going to look at why do people decide to stay or leave an organization? And then we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into the role of managers in 2024. Then we'll just finish off with a quick summary to close it out, and then on to the bit that everyone's excited about, the Q&A session. So make sure, as I said, you get all your questions ready. And that's what today is going to look like. So back over to you, Laura. I'm just curious to know if we've had any responses so far to that question that you asked.
Yes, Sarah, we've had quite a few responses actually. So far, a lot of people, the general consensus seems to be about culture not being as expected or discussed. So when people are potentially joining a company, they get there, the environment's not as was described or not what they expected. And as a result, they choose to leave the company that they've joined. Another response we've had is the lack of progression and growth. So it seems that even if people are happy in their roles, the progression, the growth opportunities just aren't there. So they leave that company and join a company where there is an opportunity for that growth.
Yeah, I think that's all things that Wayne and Justin are going to address on today's webinar. So I think that there'll be some interesting points of conversation for those people who have put those answers in the chat. Just to start us off, in terms of challenges around retention, Wayne, you mentioned that you've done a lot of research in this area. So based on that research that you have done, what have you found to be the main challenges that employers are facing when it comes to employee retention?
Well, it starts with the attraction process, aside from, of course, having an awesome organization like MCG help you into an organization, but the attraction process for many people, candidates, is of course the brand, isn't it? We're attracted by the brand often, we're attracted by the description of the role. So often what can happen is there is an advertisement of what this is actually going to be like. And I'm not talking about job description, I'm talking about how the organization articulates its culture, its values, what the experience is going to be like for the employees. For many people, the experience on the ground day one doesn't necessarily match what they've been sold. And that's not, that's to do with the way the organization often articulates what it's actually like. So I think immediately for people, there can be a mismatch. And we found that in certainly the larger, more prominent brands where people already build up an expectation of what it's going to be like to work for, so-and-so PLC, because we've seen something in the press, we've sort of built a relationship with them mentally, emotionally, of what this organization is going to be like, and it can sometimes not match that. So that's, I think, one big challenge. If I sort of then jump to the data side of things, we find that about 50% of people will say that they leave organizations because they don't feel grown and developed. So it's a fascinating number. We say 50% go because they don't grow. And what we found, of course, is if you look at the levers of any organization based on what we've seen, about 50% of those will leave because they feel that there are a lack of development opportunities for them. So when people say, they left for the money and whatnot, yeah, maybe that is the case. But for the majority of people, based on what we found, it tends to be either the development opportunities or indeed something more systemic to do with what they would term as a toxic culture, or a culture that they just kind of don't gel with. So again, actually, we ran a LinkedIn poll on this a few days ago, and overwhelmingly people have said that actually it is a toxic culture, which seems to be the predominant reason. Why that's the case, because again, it's still too broad and lofty. And what we're trying to focus on a lot is how can I do something with this? Interesting stats, but what can I do? If we sort of really jump into it, maybe we'll get into this more later, but we think that the role of the regular conversation, the one-to-one, the team conversation, the development conversations, the appraisal conversations, these are the moments of truth, which for most people, where you bring the culture to life and then where you can make that difference. And that tends to be nothing to do with money.
Yeah, really interesting points there. And Justin, I'm curious, is that mirrored in the Middle East and Asia in terms of those points that Wayne's risen? Is it the same kind of things that you see particularly in the Middle East and Asia?
Yeah, I think culture is something we regularly hear from across customers, why people want to leave. I think there's a lot of businesses that really need to work on their culture, is what we've learned to understand. Surprisingly, what we've seen is a trend of sort of retention rates in our territories, particularly at the moment where there's such a fierce demand for talent with regional experience. It's people are staying in businesses for shorter time periods now. They've got a lot more options. Markets like the Middle East have grown quite sizably, so there's a lot of competition across the market. That's and what we see as recruiters, a lot of people have flicked their open to work switch on, which again is always a good signal that there's issues afoot. Okay, so we can see that there's been a significant increase recently in the amount of people that have flicked on the open to work switch. Now, I think there's a couple of things at play in the different markets there. You've got the Asia Pacific market, which has been, it's had quite a tough turn of events recently. It's certainly suffered from some of the issues going on globally. They sort of felt the ripple effects there. I think businesses perhaps have had to downsize. Companies have had to restructure, so that therefore creates a feeling within the business of insecurity for talent. And in the Middle East, the markets continue to grow. So I think people flick on their open to work button because they are, I call it the smash and grab culture a bit. People come here, they want to earn as much as they can in a quicker time as possible. Now, I have a lot to say about people who come in spray themselves across different jobs and then leave, you know, with a pretty bad reputation at the end of it. I don't think that's a good way to go about it. But I equally don't think you should sit in a business where there's a toxic culture. So there's quite a lot going on, and we are getting briefed, you know, very, very, you know, fortunately, we are well known in both our markets. So business has been good for us, but it's interesting to see how much headhunting is required now, because people are really struggling to find talent.
Yeah. And I guess for the people who have joined this webinar today, they're mostly kind of employers or hiring managers, HR, maybe internal recruiters, and they're listening to those things that you've both mentioned there. And I'm guessing the question that's top of everyone's mind is, with all of those challenges and everything that you mentioned, what is the answer to mitigating those things around retention?
Well, I'll go first. I think, look, let me start by just telling you, let me tell you about what the problem is, and that really can be a good place to start. So when we speak to candidates, the reason they tell us that, you know, that they want to leave a business is misaligned with culture, poor management, and generally things that, you know, behavior, micromanagement, generally things that kind of are associated with a toxic culture, and where trust isn't really shown to the employee, where there seems to be a real distance between the management and the employee. And I think, you know, that for a start is a big red flag in this market as well. It's so expensive to replace people, so it's super important to try and retain your great talent. It's going to save you, you know, a small fortune, and often, you know, running a recruitment process is takes up everyone's time. It's very costly towards a business, so you don't want to be endlessly going through recruitment processes. So you really, as a business, it's so crucial that you retain your talent, because you invested probably so much time to get them there. Okay, I think one of the things that a lot of businesses that we've noticed are missing a trick on is that the actual managers themselves, they haven't been trained. They're rookies to managing people. They don't know what good looks like. So I think a lot of businesses also need to invest in their interview process, in training their managers, in making sure they're fully equipped to make the employees feel appreciated and loved. You know, people don't leave companies, they leave managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all of that is really, really true and interesting. And Wayne, is that kind of echoed by you if you were asked the question, what's the thing that people can do to kind of mitigate people leaving and keep their best people? If you were to sum that up just very quickly, what would you say?
Well, yeah, I'd agree 100% with Justin. People definitely leave managers. If you then dig into why do they leave managers, often what you find is it's not necessarily because you've got like really horrible people that people generally fall out with and argue with all the time. It's not that. It's more that there's no compelling reason to stay. There's more of a compelling reason to leave than there is to stay. It's not like there's a compelling reason to leave because someone's been particularly horrible, but it's more like the conditions that are not there why you would want to stay. i.e., if you think again about development, if you think about conversations to do with growth. And here's one of the big issues that we look at with managers, because most managers don't know themselves. Right. So if you were to take an average manager population of many organizations we come across and ask them, you know, describe to me over the next 3 to 5 years, what's the strategic goal or objective of this organization and what we're here to do? Most wouldn't be able to tell you. Then the challenge, of course, is now I've got to sit with my team and try and turn that lack of knowledge into something engaging. It's really hard, if not impossible, to achieve. So I think this is where we look at the manager training element, is we're trying to build their skills, but also build their understanding so that they can think as closely as possible to the way that the CEO, the CFO, the CMO thinks about the business.
Yeah. Okay, so if we just dive a little bit deeper, I guess, on those sentiments that you mentioned there and kind of the top reasons and how managers play a part. I know that your organization does a lot of research on this particular area, and that you've pinpointed kind of the top 5 reasons why people decide to leave an organization. So we'll go into them all in depth as we go through the webinar, but if you can just kind of go through each of them just now, if people are looking for the top 5 things that they might want to look at to help them with their retention, what would those be?
The number one, I would argue, is probably goal setting. So most people are going to be, quite what's the word, selfishly focused in terms of what they're getting out of all of this. And that might be about the money, but it's usually about development and what this means for their growth and so on. So I think the goal setting process is often one of the areas which is grossly overlooked, grossly sort of underestimated of how powerful a great goal can be for someone. And when I say a great goal, it's not that you've just got a clear articulation of it, but it actually means something for someone, I think is key. In order to get someone to understand that goal, of course, the appraisal conversation is an art form. You know, it's not a science, it's definitely an art. And someone said to me, you know, if management was an art, was a science, then we'd have an equation for it by now, right? Because we've been at this for like thousands of years. This is not new stuff. We're relearning everything we've forgotten all the time. So the art of an appraisal conversation is something important to focus on. We look at time as a big element. So time for us is the big challenge because most people don't have much of it. It's the most precious resource that we probably have, depending on your views of reincarnation, of course. But even then, we might not be back in this form. So when we think about time, it's the biggest challenge and people don't have it. Along with the time challenge is the attention span challenge. So we know that the attention spans of people are not necessarily getting shorter, but we know there's much more competing factions for your attention. Think about every single social channel that's out there trying to demand your team's attention as much as you are as the organization. We know this is the real issue. And then when we look at what we call understanding who we serve, understanding the customer, the client, often organizations are awash with insight about what the customer feels and thinks, but most people inside the organizations don't really understand either. So often you've got sort of misfiring of what people think the customer wants, but actually they don't really want because they've not taken the time to understand it. So again, there's a whole bunch of reasons here, but I think these are some of the key ones. Again, we can get into this in some more detail.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think that as you went through all of those points, I certainly was thinking wherever you've worked and what throughout your career, there's always been elements of that. So I think that people can kind of understand that. I think first of all, if we can look at the role of managers in 2024 and the impact that has on employee retention. I know that when we first spoke previously, you told me some really interesting stats around the amount of people that leave managers and that most people have had what you would class a toxic manager at one point in their career and how much of an impact that has on a company's kind of overall retention. So I'm really keen to just dive into what the role of a manager is now and kind of some of the interesting facts that you have around that.
Yeah. It's a great question, great way to start, because I think many people assume what the role of the manager is. So what's the job of the manager? It's a very basic, simple question. And most people will say, well, it's to manage the team, isn't it? Yeah, of course it is. But if you were to redesign the role of the manager for most organizations in April 2024, the role of the manager now from scratch design would not be what it's often evolved to become. It's evolved to become what it has because of necessity, of survival of the organization and so on. But if you were to really think about it from scratch, blank sheet of paper, and say, given all of the challenges, given what we know about the market, given what we know about the competition, given what we know about the cost base, given what we know about social trends, given all the things that we now accept are true, what does that mean in terms of the role of the manager? So I think, what we would ask most leadership teams to do is just pause for a second and say, right, you could have 10, 20, 100, 10,000 managers. What's the job of the manager in 2024 going forward? And is it different than it sort of evolved to become? Most people would say, interesting. And this is the question we ask of CEOs. Is the job of the manager going forward, or should it be going forward what it's kind of is now? And they'll say, no, actually, if I had an opportunity to relook at this, I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Justin, what's your kind of thoughts around employee retention? You speak to a lot of candidates, or you have spoke to a lot of candidates in your time in recruitment. How often does it come up that maybe management has a lot to do with people deciding whether they're staying or leaving?
Yeah, it comes up pretty much. That's one of the main, unsurprisingly, it backs up everything Wayne's just said. And we always hear about the toxic manager, the crazy manager, the manager that let you take a lunch break, the manager that makes, while you're sleeping at your desk, the micromanager. We've heard all sorts of horror stories. The person that flies people back in from their holidays, and by the time they've landed, the emergency they've come in for hath ended and was dealt with. So all sorts of things we've heard. And I'll throw in a stat. You got to love a stat, right? So here's a stat from The Economist. Almost half of those surveyed in Asia placed the primary responsibility for supporting their mental well-being on their employers. Okay. That's a stat there that's I think says it all, right?
Yeah.
And just the fact is that there's not a lot of managers out there that have been taking that sort of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true, isn't it?
Sorry to jump in on this one. I mean, this is fascinating because something weird happens. Like we described this thing a while ago, talking about work world and your sort of normal world, right? So in normal world, people assume a leadership responsibility for everything in their lives, right? From putting on your socks to, in the morning, I've got 2 kids, getting the kids out on time for school, all the stuff that you would do in your daily life. You assume a leadership position, and people go through horrific things, dealing with family crises and challenges and all this stuff. And then the really often weird thing is then as soon as you get inside the sort of virtual doors of the office, the responsibility for certain things becomes someone else's problem. And this is the really interesting one when it looks at the career development issue. So, I'm an individual on this planet, and you ask a sort of quite a harsh question. Who out there would care about my growth and development more than I would? Like the painful answer is no one. Maybe you're lucky if you've got a parent or 2 who cares about your future. For everyone else, they've got no plan for you, right? Pretty much. But we often assume that they would be. And this is the really weird So when I talk to undergraduates, I try and sort of get into their heads. As soon as you get into the workplace, your development, your career is all you. This is all you. As much as the organization will say on their website that they're going to try and fulfill your purpose in life and open the nirvana experience of the universe to experience the oneness of all, doubt it. You're on your own. You're on your own. This is on you.
I think that's a really interesting point, Wayne, and I'm curious to ask a question to you about that. What's your advice to people on how they can actually take control of their own development and career? How do you have those difficult conversations with your manager about what it is that you want? If you feel nervous about it, what would your advice be for people that are thinking, well, I would love to do that, but I've just got no idea how to?
Yeah, well, I think there's a great question. There's a few things. I think one is that you needed some sort of a plan. And I'm not saying that you need to have some, detailed McKinsey style strategic objective setting process on your life. It's not necessarily that. It could even be an emotion, but you need to have some sense of clarity of what it is you want. And I think that's the hardest place to start. It sounds like a really easy question to answer, but what do you want? My mum's 69 years old, and she says to me jokingly, she doesn't know what she wants to do when she grows up, right? This is a conversation we have. And I said, not many people have actually worked it out. I think you're lucky in life if you've managed to find out what it is that you want. Most people don't know. Most CEOs I meet with of companies don't know either. Many of them have fallen into careers and spent 30 years building an organization that they never really sort of consciously chose to do, right? So first thing is get clear on what you want. And that could take some time. Like give it some considered thought would be really useful. But then the second part of it is, I think when choosing a manager, I think this is really important. This is what I talk with undergrads about. When choosing a manager, there are 2 key things that we look at, or choosing a leader you're going to work with. One is how well connected are they in that organization? Are they well networked, right? So we describe what we call the dream manager. Dream manager does 2 things. One is that they understand the organization really well. They're well networked and they get it, right? The second thing is that you get a sense that this individual genuinely seems to care about your growth and development, right? We're not going to say they're going to care as much as your parents might do, but they're going to care to some degree about where you go in life. That would be good. And if you get a sense that those 2 conditions aren't met, then I would argue stay away from that type of manager. And this is what we try and educate, younger people to talk about and think about in the workplace. But the first one is a really important one. If that individual isn't well networked, what we know for sure is that development opportunities to grow and build your skill sets are more a function of how well you can be exposed to many different things. So you talk to anyone who's successful, any CEO, any entrepreneur, they've probably done a bunch of things that they didn't like, right? As well as things that they do like. But it's the process of experiencing things that gets you to realize certain things too. So I think, it's incumbent on a great manager, we would argue, to be able to open up opportunities. And you could work in a small organization of 10 people. It doesn't mean that there are limited opportunities to learn, grow, and develop. Ironically, one of the big global banks that we work with, have thousands and thousands of people. The main reason why their employees leave is because they feel that there's a lack of development opportunities. mind-blowing. And it's not because there are a lack of development opportunities, it's because the manager conversations with the team are genuinely quite lousy. If you were to pluck them out at random and say, right, give me the experience of what that one-to-one felt like, often you'd find not much of quality. It's a tick box exercise designed to run a process which has often been outsourced to another organization that's designed to then use it to equate pay and all the other things. So, I think that the quality of the one-to-one is king. That's something to kind of control, because you can't control how good your manager is with that. But the one thing that you can control, of course, is clarity about what it is that you want.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think that leads us quite nicely on to the next point that we wanted to talk about, which was goal setting. That's one of the things that you mentioned to be the most important when it comes to retaining your best staff. So I'm just curious and how we kind of segue from how an employee can kind of set their own goals and make sure that they're in the driving seat of their own career and their own development. Now, on the employer side, can you tell us a bit more about what goal setting looks like and how that has an impact on employee retention?
Yeah, I mean, take something like, I don't know. So last summer I was in Dubai with one of the big banks, talking to a few hundred of their experts that have been brought together from all around the world, looking at customer feedback. Their goal in every one of their chosen markets is to become much better than they currently are, or to change the way that many of their customers see them, because right now it's not particularly great. That's like the organizational goal, right? Then look at how does that translate through to different people. Now, remember, I might be the most junior person. I could be a greeter as you walk into the branch of the bank. And my job is to welcome you into the branch. In most organizations, that organizational goal never makes it to me, right? All I get told is smile away when people walk in and greet them in a nice way. It kind of makes sense, but it's often got no connection to what it is, what we're trying to achieve. We've got a large supermarket chain that we work with. They're based here in the UK, and they've got over 100,000 people. We found there, of all the organizations we looked at, they had the worst workplace bullying scores. So we set off on an investigation to try and understand why it's the case. And I was puzzled because I met with the CEO and leadership team, and it was very sensible. We had a nice conversation about the growth targets for next year. Then what you realize was the 3% target that they've got set to grow by next year, and obviously it's a large organization. If you then look at how does that cascade itself all the way through to the front of the organization, where I'm actually on the checkout tills and I'm helping customers, those guys, their managers, and even the store managers have no connection at all anymore to the original conversation that I saw in the leadership team conversation happen. What you find then at the front line is just bullying and aggression, and quite rightly in a way, because they're desperately trying to achieve a number. They don't know why they're trying to achieve a number, but they've got a number to hit. And if they don't hit that number, then there are sanctions and there are issues and there are difficult conversations that come as a result of it. So the goal setting process from the organizational side is often massively disconnected. It's often out of context. If you're lucky enough to be, or put it this way, the closer by proximity, physical proximity you are to the leadership team, by geographical distance and by grade, often the more you will understand of the context of the organization. The more that difficult things make much more sense, the more that I'd be able to translate that into something that's relevant for my team. The further you are away from them, the more mystical it becomes, to the point where you just don't even know. So from an organizational point of view, again, when we look at the role of the manager, how can we help our managers, again, you could have thousands of them, to be able to understand the goal of the organization like you do as the CEO? That's the first big challenge. Then the next challenge, of course, is how do we help the individuals to make a connection to that?
Yeah, interesting. Justin, what's your thoughts on how important kind of goal setting is, and how important it is to have your employees and even potential candidates understand what the goals of the organization are?
I've learned firsthand on this particular topic that you can't not over communicate to staff. I think there's always, something that I've certainly assumed sometimes is that people know what we're doing or understand the direction, because I've said it once, and actually you need to repeat. So you constantly need to, I think, in business, over communicate where your goal is, what you're doing as a business, what you're trying to achieve. That's a big tip I can give to anyone, and where I could speak from personal experience where I've fallen short before. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a couple of stats out you as well. Why not? Hey, so we did a poll at MCG Talent, and interestingly enough, 26% of candidates value development above all else, which I think backs up everything that we're saying there. But 71% said the reason they're searching for a new role is due to a lack of career development in their current company. And I bet most of that is down to just poor messaging. I bet there is opportunities, but the company hasn't been able to communicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're just going to pause here for a moment because we've had quite a lot of questions coming through. So I'm just going to hand over to Laura very briefly, so that she's able to ask you guys a few questions, because we want to make sure that we're getting as many questions to you as possible.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, we have had quite a few questions come in. So we've had one about developing a better working environment. So what are the best ways to start developing that?
Or to develop the working environment?
Yes, correct. It's for a better environment, really. So let's say the environment isn't where you want it to be. Where do companies start in making it better?
Well, I'd say like the evolution of this came from, of course, we talked a lot about employee engagement going back a while ago. I'm 47 now, so I'm going grey. But in sort of late 90s, it sounds a long time ago, doesn't it? When I joined Deloitte, we were talking about employee engagement. It sort of morphed itself into the employee experience. And what you would really do, like the moment of truth sort of analysis is really helpful. So as a practical tool, I would take a week, just look at a week in the life of the team or any team and say, right, how does it look? So on a Monday morning, how does the manager or the leader greet people when they come in on a Monday? What's the team briefing like? To Justin's point, you can't under communicate or can't over communicate enough. It's really important. What does if you're going to have a one-to-one, what does that look like? What's the quality of that? What the team meetings look like? How do they go? How do people get left on a Friday? So there are a sequence of events which happen in most people's week at work. If the sequence of events are generally quite additive, if that's the word, or valuable for you, you would leave the working week saying, I had a pretty good week at work. Equally, if they're not so good, you'd leave saying toxic workplace. It's not that there's actually any chemical toxicity at play, is that there's a bunch of interactions that you probably thought weren't favorable. So again, as a manager, you can dissect this quite simply and say, right, how do we make a great week at work, start Monday, end Friday, and think what are the interactions and the things that we could do to make people leave on a Friday saying, looking forward to coming back here again next week, because you're going to spend 5 days out of the 7 we've got in life, for most of us, at work. So it's key.
Okay, and Justin, do you have anything to add to Wayne's comment about that communication throughout the week?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies think getting good culture right is about having free fruit and a snooker table and a tennis table and everything else being the same as it is. That's and if anyone dared use that snooker table, well, they're in big trouble. So look, I think it's not about putting physical things in place. It's a change in behavior, and where we've seen people, it's when their time's valued and appreciated. You can't buy back time, as Wayne rightly said. So flexibility is like a big thing that we continue to hear, that people really sort of I think helps create a harmonious atmosphere in an office, and it shows respect towards the employee's time as well. That's a big one that we quite hear a lot. So that's what I would add to Wayne's many points there.
Okay, super. We'll just do one more question as well. And this question is actually about setting SMART targets, SMART goals. So for those of you that aren't sure what that acronym means, it means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based goals. How often do you recommend setting those types of goals?
Personally, I would recommend like twice a year, and I'd check them every 3 months. I think would be really relevant. Even when I joined the workforce, as I said many moons ago, my manager at the time said to me, where do you see yourself in 9 months? And I thought it was such an odd question, because everyone else had asked me as a new graduate, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I said, 9 months. But we were in a technology part of Deloitte. And he was saying to me, our world changes really fast. So we have to keep changing our goals. And I thought, well, a great way to look at it. So, where do you see yourself every I think a 90-day cycle is a clever way to sort of keep re-looking at these goals. Are they relevant still? Do they still work? Because you can often set yourself a target and then live out of a reality which kind of is no use anymore to you.
That's
Yeah.
super.
I think 90 days is spot on. It's exactly what I do as well, from health, wellness, professionally, everything, because there's too much going on in the world professionally for you to, I think, Q1, we set, and after the end of Q1, we set and adjust. The end of Q2, we set and adjust, and we continue to do that all year. And like, even for me, health and well-being, I set myself quarterly objectives as well. Otherwise, it just feels unattainable, I find anyway.
Okay, I know I said that would be my last question for the moment, but I've had another question that's come through that sort of builds on that question, so it's a good time to ask it. What are your tips on how to communicate those goals or the company vision in a way where people will remember it and remember the goals?
Well, the trick is, in a way, not to communicate it, right? So what I mean by that is, if you look at most leadership teams, and I was always interested, why do most leadership teams feel more excited about the goal than anyone else I meet in the company? Is it because they just get excited by such things? Are they sort of people? The answer is definitely not. It's the reason why that they're excited more than anyone else often is because they're the people who made it up. Things that you make up, you think are pretty cool because you made it up, right? And the reason why they are connected to it is because they spend a disproportionate amount of time talking it through. So it'd be weird, wouldn't it? If I was in the office walking down the corridor, I say, hey, Laura, fancy getting a sandwich and talking about the goals of the organization and what it means to us? Yeah, come on. Like,
yeah.
No, thank you, Wayne. Loser, leave me alone. Weirdo. This is a weird conversation to have with a random colleague, right? But it's the exact conversation the leadership team have, but they get the opportunity to spend often 2 days discussing it in a nice hotel somewhere, right? So, and then they leave with a shared context and understand what all of this means. So it's not necessarily the communication of it, it's the dialogue, which is the king. So, how do we make sure that we can create an opportunity for people, for you and I, Laura, to sit down together, and it could be for half an hour, it doesn't need to be long, and say, right, here are the goals of the organization. They're on a piece of paper. Makes a lot of sense on paper. Right, what does that mean for the organization? Well, that's interesting. Okay, I'm a bit more interested though. I like what's going on in the world. I'm interested in that. I'm a bit more interested in what's going on in Dubai. I'm even more interested in what's going on in my house. There's a sort of a very simple link. What does the goal mean for the organization? Interesting. Let's discuss it. What does it mean for our particular team or department or directorate, wherever we work? That's interesting. What does it mean for me personally? That's even more interesting. And that can be a really simple conversational process to bring to life the goal for the individual. Then you can start setting some smart objectives around it. That makes sense then. Otherwise, you can't set smart objectives around things that are not clear to you. So I think getting that goal communicated, I think, is the key. And the key to it, of course, is not the communication necessarily, it's the dialogue. And the reason why I say that is because having observed all these thousands of different leaders and CEOs at this, the ones who seem to really get it tend to spend a lot of time talking about it, which makes so much sense.
Right. And Justin?
Look, I think what we do, all right, is we do regularly communicate on all different communication tools, but what we also do is we host a quarterly sort of webinar and town hall where everyone can throw questions in and we can share objectives and talk about those. I think that's really pretty healthy and make sure that there isn't a misalignment in terms of where we're going and what's going on. I don't, as Wayne just brought up, I don't think I have, Laura, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think I've collared you and said, hey, do you fancy going for a sandwich and talk about our goals? If I do, please give me a kick, all right?
No, I can promise you haven't done that. Thank you both for your answers. I am going to pass back to Sarah and we'll come back to the questions later in the webinar, just because time is quickly ticking on. So back to Sarah to go back to our top 5.
Thank you very much, Laura. Really good questions there, so keep them coming, everyone. The next point we have on our agenda in terms of those top 5 reasons is the appraisal conversation. So quite keen to understand from you both how important that is when it comes to employee retention, and any tips that you have for anyone watching on what they need to be thinking about when it comes to managers having those conversations.
I'll go. I mean, in terms of like a super practical tip, right? The 3 things to think about, like the setup process. How do you set this thing up? How do you execute it? And how do you follow it up, right? It's like the 3 stages to think about in the appraisal conversation. And I think for most people, you don't sort of, when someone says, we're going to sit down and have our appraisal conversation, it doesn't often fill people's hearts with excitement, does it? It's like, usually there's going to be something a bit difficult. It could be about a target that we've not met, or it could be something. So the whole idea is, of course, that if you think about the actual word, it means, to appraise. It's a good thing, right? It's an appraisal. That's what it should be about, and it should be focused on strengths. So I think, looking at that, and we would even add another word into this, what we call an inspiring appraisal conversation. The reason why we look at that is because we spent a long time looking at different organizational types. You could have charities that literally have zero budgets for pay rises or bonuses, or even to be able to invest in training courses. But often what you've got to do in a voluntary workforce, for example, in a charity, is you've got to inspire people, because you're trying to translate this goal into action. So the key is the translation process that you go through in that one-to-one. So we often talk about the act of inspiring people is really key, but that's, again, it comes with practice, and it's something that you need to sort of work at. I believe anyone can get good at it, but it requires a little bit of practice to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that, and coming in hot with some more stats. So we did another poll over at MCG Talent, and it's largely due to the fact we've released our EVP product, which we spoke about before, and what we wanted to find out was, aside from salary, which is always the obvious one, what is the thing that most people want to hear from their employer, the thing that they're most interested in, engaged in. It's development opportunities. Okay. Now the appraisal there is the perfect opportunity, obviously, to communicate that, to talk through the development program that the employee is going to be going. So those appraisal conversations that you have, yes, most people have them yearly, but we actually have monthly catch-ups as well. I think you can't over communicate. So the data that we've got backs up the fact that people want to hear about what their development's going to be. People want to hear how they're going to get from A to Z, or Z, as anyone in England would want me to say. So that's the key thing to really be clear on this, is that I think appraisals shouldn't just be left as this 1 year, one hit wonder, but it should be regularly communicated what an employee's development program is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm just going to quickly move on, because we are up against time a little bit, to optimizing time, which is a nice little leap through to what I just said there. So in terms of those 5 points, optimizing time, you've mentioned, Wayne, is another thing that's really, really key for managers to get right when it comes to employee retention. Do you want to just give us a little bit of, what do you mean by that, and how does it have an impact on employee retention?
Well, let's start off with a sombering number. Right, life expectancy for women is about 82 years, for men about 79. Right, subtract your age from that. That's what you got left. I'm worried because I'm 47. I'm way past halfway. Right, it's a worrying number when you think about it. Right, time is our most precious resource, so time is the issue. If you then look at who in the world is hyper effective with time and manages to achieve a lot with time, take an extreme example: someone like an Elon Musk. Love him or hate him, can't argue he's not effective with time. So runs, multiple companies. Has got, I think, 10 children or eight or 9 children. So huge family, huge commitments, and manages to achieve all of this stuff. Still has 24 hours in the day like everyone else, but manages to achieve exceptional things. And the key is, I watched an interview with him. It was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he kept asking him about how does he do it? How does he, and what's quite clear is that he seems to be an absolute expert at delegation. Coming up with things, letting go, empowering other people to do it, building teams, and therefore manages to achieve a hell of a lot with the time. So when we look at optimizing time, the key is, how do you use the time more effectively? And we know that many people don't prune the amount of time that they spend on things on a regular basis. So we found out that about 2/3 of a manager's week, based on what we found of interviewing managers, is spent in meetings at work. Right. Of those 2/3 of the week spent in meetings, managers tend to believe that about 1/3 of that time is valuable time spent. We found out some other shocking stats on this one. We found out that 7 out of 10 people bring other work to meetings. Right. So that was bad in the face-to-face world, even worse in virtual world, right? Where you can turn off your camera and then, I'm on TikTok or whatever. That's one thing. We found out that 4 out of 10 people admitted to having a sleep in meetings. Brilliant. Get your
Wow.
duvets out, get cozy, sing a lullaby, MCG talent lullaby evening. And then third thing is that we found out that about half the time spent in meetings, for most people, will say is a total waste of time. So if you were to, again, practical tip, look over the last month, let's say in your diary, look over the next month. What are things that you can stop doing, get rid of, say no to? Often it's harder as a more junior person because you kind of feel like politically, for me to say no to going to this meeting isn't great, but it's going to take up 2 hours of my time. And therefore I could use that time more effectively, which comes back to, what do you talk about in this regular conversation one-to-one with the line manager? It might be a request that, or your leader, could I stop coming to this thing? Can I get off of this committee? So the challenge is, so set yourself a challenge, is to work out how do you get 10% of your week back? And so, ultimate would be about 20%, but you probably want to have 10 to 20% of your working week where you've got nothing in that space, and it gives you an opportunity to redeploy that time at will. That could be you want to reinvest that time into your own personal growth and development. It could be that you want to spend more time in the gym. It could be, whatever, how you want to redeploy that time. It's key because often people don't have that space. So, when we look at optimizing time, it's a massive issue. And then compound that out across an organization. If you've got 1,000 staff, 10,000 staff, how much of that time is spent doing non-value added activity because people don't recheck what they're working on, and is it important anymore?
Yeah, I think the meeting point is something that's really interesting. I think, back when I first became a manager, I was always pulled into about a million different meetings. It felt like every week you kind of were expected to be present. But then when you're in that more kind of junior management role, you still have a bunch of work to do. So you can't spend your whole life in meetings, and you kind of create this deficit of time where you don't have enough time to actually do the work that you have to do because most of your time is spent in meetings. Totally, what would be your advice to people who are maybe in that situation where they're starting to come up the corporate ladder a little bit and they're having to kind of mitigate having that dual responsibility now, and then what impact, I guess, does that have on people maybe feeling burnt out and then leaving an organization?
So one of the things to try and solve in the short term seems always really difficult, if not impossible, right? So I'm really busy. I've got loads of meetings to go to. If I look in my diary, you're sort of thinking, oh God, can't stomach the next week. Look at that. It looks horrific. You often can't change that because it's too immediate. So what often happens is very busy people it's like a weird conundrum. You can't solve the busy challenge because you're always busy. So, and you can't, when I throw out a figure of create 20% of space in your week, you might say, oh, that's ridiculous. How is that possible? Right. Your diary now looks really busy. I would imagine your diary in, let's say, September starts to look a little less busy. The further out you go, the more empty it probably is. So from September the 1st, put out, half a day or a day a week, and keep that time locked out, sacrosanct in your diary. And therefore your life will work around it. Magically, it always seems to, as if you've got something important like a doctor's appointment, dentist, whatever it is, that time that you really value. That's one of the very simple ways to do it. In one respect. In another respect is to try and get out of agreeing to do things. So again, and that might mean building your confidence as an individual to be able to say to a manager, no, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to be there. But of course, to give good reason. When I left Deloitte and went to work for another company, I'd started on the Monday, and our boss at the time asked me we had a big project on, I just joined, and said, this is going to require some working over the weekend. And I said no to doing it. Which felt at the moment, it comes out your mouth, you're like, oh no, it's like suicide. But it set our relationship. He never asked me to do it again. Whereas other people got pulled into doing stuff. And there's always stuff to do, there's always stuff. But unless you sort of guardrail, sort of safeguard that time, you're always going to be in this time deficit problem.
Yeah. And then Justin, I guess my question for you on this would be, how often is it that you're speaking to candidates and they're saying that, their time is the main reason that they've decided that they want to leave somewhere, whether that be, they don't have enough personal time, or they're spending time at work potentially doing things that they don't feel are valuable to them? And how important is that to the candidates that you're speaking to?
Yeah, I think for respect and appreciation of people's time is absolutely critical. It's something that, I think comes up a lot. It's actually one of the interesting things, because a lot of people have moved to a more remote and flexible environment now. In some respects, some managers have taken advantage of that by feeling that any time is their time. So that's one thing that we have noticed. So I think you have to really sort of create those boundaries and do a bit of the do a bit of the weight and stamp your ground very early on with your manager. I think that's that's a very brave thing to do, but really did set and measure or set his storm with his manager. And it takes guts to do that, but I think the manager probably will respect the individuals that can do that as well. They would if they're a credible one. And so, look, from my experience, we've seen candidates who feel like their work's getting repetitive as well. So I think time, they become clock watchers as a result of that as well. And that leads to them feeling unfulfilled in business. And I think that will lead them to looking for opportunities elsewhere, where they're just bored. That they feel like what they're doing is really optimizing any time. It's boring time. And the other thing I would probably say is that businesses that are coming from, people that are coming from sort of larger businesses, they really want to see how their time can be optimized and the impact that they can make, how that can be, how much of their time can really be focused on doing impactful work, and rather than just being another cog in the wheel, shall we say. So that's another thing I would just probably add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on to our fifth and final point now, which is understanding who you serve as a manager. So how important is it that managers understand who it is that they serve on employee retention?
Well, it's huge. It's probably one of the biggest issues that we see come out consistently from the staff surveys. So when you look at the verbatim comments in any staff survey, you tend to find lots of anger about how people don't feel served. So a typical one, right? And not to label them as anything negative, but they come under a lot of fire in many organizations is IT. Let's take IT as a good example. Everyone attacks IT. The challenge, of course, in IT is that they're dealing with many complex things and different situations and systems and so on. But often people get attacked. And the attack is that they don't understand us. They don't understand the challenges we go through. Why do they build the system in that way? Why do they, so on. So often what happens is there's a big misunderstanding. And understanding who the people, who you serve is probably one of the most important things to focus on, both inside, if you're serving internal clients and customers, and also externally. So a company that we worked with was spending over $1 million, it's about $1.2 million a year, conducting what they called key account feedback, listening to what the customer wanted from the organization. They had 250 leaders in the company, and we'd found out from internal surveys that about 25 of those leaders had actually read the report that they were spending about $1.2 million on. 225 managers had no idea what the customer was actually saying, but they spent this money, and this wasn't like a one-off. This was an annual spend on a campaign to run and listen to what the customers were saying. And that's just the 200 odd leadership team members, let alone the other 3,000 staff they've got in the organization. So again, you think about how does that voice of the customer translate its way through? You could argue that it's a tremendously unempathic way to operate an organization. And it's quite arrogant because you're not even taking into account what the customer actually wants. You're just plowing ahead, giving them what you think that they want, which is often a totally different thing. So I think when it comes to the retention issue, this is huge because imagine how this works its way through to the team goal, how it works its way through to development opportunities that could be given more of. Again, the bank I was talking about, I was in Dubai with last year. That was fascinating because they had on their Facebook page, they have about 2.3 million followers who just give angry feedback all the time about how bad the bank is. But the community of people brought together to solve this customer service challenge had never read any of the feedback on Facebook. So again, you're an angry customer giving what you feel is the right sort of feedback to the organization, but it's not getting taken into account. The opportunity is, if you were inside that company, and it boggled my mind, I'm thinking if I was an employee here, I would be all over that feedback because it now makes me king of the feedback. If you're the person who understands the customer insight data better than anyone else, you're in a really powerful position because no one's going to argue with you about that. So as a development opportunity, I was looking at that thinking, wow, this is like for the taking here, but no one's taking the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And Justin, what's your thoughts on that and kind of how it impacts whether an employee stays or goes in terms of their manager having an understanding of who they serve, both from a customer perspective, but also the manager serving them as a member of their team?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, one of our many polls was covered this point as well. And look, what we found was that 65% of respondents from one of our polls mentioned that having a positive and inclusive culture was really, really, really important to them. Okay, so clearly that, you know, it's way up there. And I think having a manager who cares about them, who respects them, you know, that naturally creates a good company culture, which is what we're looking for. I think, you know, we've worked with candidates who've left because they just don't feel that the organization they work for supports their needs, their aspirations, or obviously really just considers them at all. And usually when you dig quite deep on that, the reason why they leave is because of X, Y, and Z. But fundamentally, a lot of the time, it's down to poor relationships with their manager. And that's, you know, that is a poor overall culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think your manager can have such an impact on you and whether you decide to stay or go. So sometimes even if you work for the best organization on the planet with the best development and the best culture and everything, if you've got a manager who just isn't a very good manager, you'll leave anyway because they have the biggest impact on your day-to-day life.
And just maybe another, maybe slightly more contentious way to look at this is if you keep coming across bad managers all the time and there's a pattern, then what is it about you? Right. So this might be an uncomfortable truth to look at, but there might be something about the way that I am engaging with this individual that is causing me to have these fractious relationships. And often we can put the blame on the managers. You know, it's always the managers why they left. It was never that I messed up or I didn't have a good one-to-one or I didn't, you know, one of the things that we often look at is how empathic is the individual at understanding the challenges for the manager. So when I joined Deloitte, my boss said to me, he said, it's really important, Wayne, that you don't understand just your boss's objectives, understand your boss's objectives. I'm like, is this some weird riddle? And like, the more that I sat and thought about it, I thought, oh, that makes so much sense. Because he said to me, if you make sure and help me win, you win. I thought, of course, this is like a symbiotic relationship. It's that, you know, everyone wins if we get this right. So I think on the individual level, yeah, the manager is always going to be a challenge. But what can I do within my control to build and improve the quality of this relationship? And just final quick thing on this. I met with a company, it was about 4 weeks ago, and one of the guys was talking to me about this difficult relationship with his line manager. And I said to him, is there something different that you could do? So for example, could you maybe change the game a little bit, go out, have some dinner together, have a drink? And then he said to me, he said, well, the problem is with dinner. He said, I finish at 5 o'clock. I thought, wow, well, there's no hope for you, you know, because it was definitely none of his responsibility to change or improve that relationship. It was all one-sided. It's all that horrible, evil person who needs to change their ways. And that's, if you're coming across evil people all the time, again, you've got to start to take another look at yourself, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to look at that from the other perspective as well. Right, well, that is us kind of at the end of our scheduled agenda for today. So thank you so much, Wayne and Justin, for your input and your wisdom today that you've shared with us. Justin and Wayne, if people want to get in contact with you, which I'm sure they will after hearing all about your thoughts and experiences on retention today, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Justin, you can go
LinkedIn.
first.
LinkedIn
for both.
Let's go in sync. That make it really good. LinkedIn's good for me. Please hit me up. I'm always on LinkedIn.
Yeah, same for me too. Perfect.
There you go. So get yourself onto LinkedIn and connect with Justin and Wayne, and they'll be happy to have a conversation with you afterwards. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Laura, who I'm going to hand over to in a second, for looking after you all in the chat today, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. So thank you very much, Laura.
No problem, Sarah. It was an absolute pleasure. And don't forget, everybody, that the Q&A will go on until we've answered all of your questions. So this is probably your last chance now to get them into the chat. So if you've got anything else that you want to know, pop your questions in now.
Perfect. So last chance for questions. If you have any questions, then please feel free to ask them now. Pop them in the chat. So that's the only way that we can answer your questions on Zoom. So I can see that we have someone with their hand up, but if you can please pop your question in the chat, and we'll answer that for you. So I'm going to pass over to Laura, and if you can just run through a couple of questions that we've had so far, Laura.
Absolutely. So this is a good question, and especially obviously for just in where our two kind of big offices are in MENA and Asia, we've had a question about those two offices and how they compare. So what are the main differences between Asia and MENA when it comes to talent retention?
I'm going to say same here. It's not, there's actually, I think a lot of the common problems that we've just discussed in this webinar come up there. You know, if you've got if you're in a business that where you're not feeling valued, where managers aren't respecting your time, where you've got, you know, you're struggling to make an impact because you feel that there is something in the way that's blocking you from growth, then that is one of the reasons why, you know, you will struggle to stay with the business and grow with the business. And so we hear the same thing in the Middle East that we do in Asia. Yes, I think everyone knows that they are expensive places to live where we've got offices, so salary does come up. But taking that outside, EVP is, you know, what businesses do to look after their employees, and how well a business can manage its staff is what we hear all the time. So even though they are thousands of miles apart, they are aligned on many things.
Super. Wayne, anything to add about that?
Well, we did our analysis of looking at what people want from a great manager, and we did that across, you know, we started in New Zealand and we worked, everywhere all the way through to, I guess, Vancouver was the furthest west. And it tended to be the same things. We ended up with, you know, a view of saying there are 12 really essential elements of being a great manager. It didn't seem to matter whether we were in Vietnam or Morocco. You know, you were hard pressed to find a human being on the planet who doesn't want a manager who respects them, listens to them, you know, makes them feel valued. You know, there are some fundamental human principles at play, which will, you know, be the determining factors in whether or not you want to leave or stay, you know, an organization. So I can agree that, you know, what Justin says, same. You'd be hard pressed to find anywhere in the world where these things wouldn't be valuable for people. We found out that we did a word frequency analysis of looking at organizational values. Really exciting, right? So if you go to a dinner party, how to end your conversation with someone really quick, bring up this one. But a word frequency analysis of organizational values, integrity was the number one. So it doesn't matter where we looked in the world, integrity seemed to be the predominant value, organizational value, but it's not to do with organizational values, is it? It's a human value. Having integrity is never seen as a bad thing anywhere on the planet.
Okay, great. Now, Justin, specifically, I know you mentioned earlier that, you know, the fruit bowls, the snooze tables, it's not gonna cut it. We have had a question that's slightly different, and it's about team luncheons and outings. So are team luncheons and outings a good way to show that you care about your employees, that you're willing to sort of bring them together? And if not, what kind of activities work best to sort of bring the team together, boost morale?
I think doing things that are as a team will always boost morale. I think doing things outside of work where you are allowing people to let their hair down, be themselves, be free, and you in turn as a manager are being like that, being that person as well, and you drop down the barriers and you allow people to get to know you. I think that will completely help company culture. What I think you can't do is can't do a sort of a let's all go out and have lots of drinks, you know, continuously. Might be some people that don't like that. There might be some people that don't drink. There might be some people that have, you know, for religious reasons, don't want to drink, etc. So you don't want to create a sort of, I wouldn't go down the path of creating a boozy culture, which can be something that a lot of recruitment businesses do. I think it would try and do something that is mixed, has variety, and that allows everyone to feel valued and that their own wishes are taken care of. And by the way, I think having pool tables and free and fruit, etc., it is pretty good, but you can't rely on that on its own. That's what the point I was making.
Yeah. Okay, super. So in terms of activities, maybe vary the activities, you know, do different things that different people in the company will enjoy and not create that kind of boozy culture that we do often see in recruitment.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, Wayne, what are your thoughts on that, about team lunches and activities?
I mean, I think that for me, the point of it would be is that you try and enable people, whichever mechanism works, to create a deeper connection with each other and build trust. So you want to build trust, which, you know, comes from having a better understanding of wwho you are and what you're up to. I mean, we have this exercise, which, and it's going to sound maybe sexist, but predominantly men dislike this more than women, I find, when we run this exercise, but I'll give it to you. So what we ask leaders to do is to sit together for an hour, right, in pairs, and for the half an hour each, share your entire life story. That's it. People are like, oh no, it's horrible. And what we found is, certainly with execs who've worked together for some cases 20, 25 years, every single time we've done this, that they will finish the hour and say, I didn't know this guy. I worked with him for 25 years, didn't know him. You know, you get that moment, don't you, even with a friend that you've known for a long time, where you have a drink or a dinner or a lunch or something, and at some point during that conversation, you're like, no way, I didn't know that you were a ballet dancer, or I didn't know that you did this or that. I had no idea. Because often there are so many layers to us, but we often don't understand that. So anything that helps to build the quality of the relationship, which often comes from knowing someone a bit deeper and more meaningful, is always a good thing to do. And you just remind me of a funny thing. We had a guy who, he ran it's a finance business. I don't know if anyone will see this who worked there, but they'll know who he is. But he bought a table tennis table and some other things for the office, because obviously he'd seen some Google video or something, thought it was a cool thing to do. The guy was an absolute demon on the table tennis table. So he was a horrible guy. He would walk around the office with his paddle looking for a competitor. And the guy who I worked with, who was the HR director, said if he saw him coming around the corner with his table tennis bat, he would pick up the phone and act like he was on a call. Because if you play him, he smashes you around. And if you dared beat him, then obviously your life is going to be hell.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
sounds...
we've got a team outing tomorrow, Wayne. We're going to a restaurant in the afternoon. So given what you've just said, I feel sorry for anyone who sits next to me tomorrow. And I keep in mind, you're going to need more than half an hour. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Start at the beginning.
That sounds like quite an intimidating environment, Wayne. Okay, our next question is, what initiatives can we introduce to foster a sense of belonging and inclusivity?
You know, when one of the first ever projects I worked on, was Arthur Andersen as it was, but then became Deloitte. And it was a brilliant exercise, right? So they called it a day zero exercise. So day zero exercise was the day that the project starts. We have a moment where we look through each other's CVs and biographies to look at the skills that you've developed that might be relevant for this project. I've never seen it done in another organization since. What a genius exercise, right? Because it might turn out that I've done things before that, you know, aren't obvious because my job title says receptionist, right? I could have been a concert level trained pianist before. I'm not saying that would be relevant for the job, but there is something that people have got this amazing myriad of skills and experiences. So when we think about inclusivity, and if you put your CFO hat on or your financial hat on as an organization, say, right, we're spending X amount, you know, of millions, in some case billions, on people every single year. And the question we like to ask CFOs is, could you get a bigger bang for your buck? And the answer is always yes. And how you get a bigger bang for your buck is you're employing people that have got these amazing skills and experiences. How much is being utilized for the good of the organization? And it's often quite a small percentage. So I think this is the key, is to try and figure out, you know, what skills and experiences people do have. And that's the way that I would personally approach inclusivity, because it means that we can employ those skills regardless of, you know, race, gender, preference, you know, all that stuff. It kind of is actually irrelevant when we start to look at the skills base of people. So a quick story on this one. We've got a hotel company that we work with in London, and they did this exercise of looking at skills that they have across the team. There was one of the guys who was a porter in the hotel. He's from Romania. And he was telling people for ages that he's a concert level trained pianist. And everyone's like, yeah, whatever. Turns out he was. So they asked him, they said, well, they have the piano in the mezzanine level at the hotel. And he just wowed everyone. He's now employed as the hotel's pianist, right? Absolutely brilliant. How many organizations would have stopped to have looked at that? You know, amazing for him, amazing for the organization. But we've all got these amazing skills that we often can't use.
Super. So Justin, what's your take on fostering a sense of belonging and inclusivity?
No, I think I'll keep it short and snappy, but what a mistake I learned in the early days of my business was I tried to hire a bunch of people like me, okay, and basically it didn't go very well. You had a bit of, you know, and that was an early lesson in management, is that you want to bring people on that complement your skills, that are, you know, that are different to you, that can bring something different to the table, have different set of eyes on and when it comes to solving a problem. And, you know, not the other thing is when it comes to account management, which is a big part of what our business is, you know, your customers like you. Not everyone's going to like it. Something I needed to face very early in my career was not everyone's going to like you, right? But they will like have someone else who brings different skills to the table. So don't hire a bunch of people who are similar to you. You know, when I got into business with Adam a few years down the track, I mean, people who know me and Adam as business partners will know that we are very different individuals, but we bring different skill sets to the table. And I would say, in setting up a business, in harboring a culture and in fostering a culture, don't always employ people like you. Make sure you've got a series of complementary skills. Here, we're very lucky. We've got different races, ages, religions, and I think that's worked really well for us. It's one of the great things about Dubai, and we've certainly got the same in Asia as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions in the chat, and thank you, Wayne and Justin, for your detailed answers. They were brilliant. Just one more thing I wanted to mention before I pass back to Sarah is we are thinking of doing a more personalized workshop with those that are interested in learning more about retention. So if that's something that you'd like to see, make sure you pop a 7 in the chat now before we close it for the day. So that is a 7 in the chat to learn more about retention. You, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, Justin and Wayne, for your time today. It was a really, really great session. Thanks everyone who watched. We will be sending a recording round. If you feel like watching it back, maybe throw Netflix off for a night and watch the webinar back again, you will be able to do that. And we hope to see you at our next one. So we'll send you an invite and we'll hope to see you then. Thank you very much.